You've probably looked around recently and felt like the rules of being a man and, well, raising a man have completely changed while you weren't looking.
Yeah, that's a very real feeling for a lot of guys right now.
Exactly. If you're feeling that shift, you are absolutely in the right place.
Hmm.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we are taking an intense, really comprehensive exploration into Conrad Reicher's highly controversial, totally gripping new ebook.
Right, screen raise why your son doesn't know how to fight or think.
That's the one. And this text, I mean, it has become a major focal point for anyone trying to understand today's cultural landscape. We're going to uncover some shocking statistics and the hidden histories Riker presents.
The history of how modern institutions operate.
Yes, specifically before they were, as the author describes it, captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
This is a lot of ground to cover.
It really is. Now, before we get started, please remember to like and subscribe to this deep dive so we can keep bringing you these thorough explorations. And if you want to follow along with the source material, and you really should, go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy Screen Raised.
Highly recommend having the text in front of you for this one.
Absolutely. And make sure you follow the author at Conrad Reicher on Substack for his daily, unfiltered content. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to map out Reicher's massive argument detailing how society, family courts, and schools have been fundamentally re-engineered.
And we are going to look really closely at the data he uses to back up these claims, because it is a massive undertaking. The sheer scale of Reicher's argument touches on, almost every aspect of modern life.
Yeah.
But we do need to establish some ground rules before we get into the weeds here. We are here to impartially break down the author's claims and the source material provided. We are not taking sides or endorsing these political viewpoints.
Right, we're your guides.
Exactly, acting as your guides to understanding the exact arguments, the historical timelines, and the underlying data Reicher presents in his book.
So let's start with Reicher's core premise. It is unapologetically direct. He says boys are not biologically broken.
That's the thesis right there.
Yeah, rather, he argues that the modern world, from the specific algorithms coding their social media feeds to the physical architecture of the classrooms they sit in, all of it has been systematically engineered to pathologize natural male behavior.
He contends that what the medical establishment calls disorders today.
Right, like we'll get into ADHD and all that later.
Exactly. He says those are often just normal masculine traits that have been criminalized by a culture demanding quiet compliance.
That reframing really is the foundation for everything else in the book.
Right.
And it sets us up perfectly for the first major pillar of his text.
The legal landscape?
Right, the legal erasure of fathers, and what Reicher controversially terms the gynocracy.
That's a heavy word.
It is. He argues that modern feminism didn't just, subtly change the cultural tone of the country. He claims it completely rewrote the legal framework of the family. He defines this gynocracy as a system of female rule without corresponding responsibility.
And he doesn't just throw that word out there for shock value.
No, he doesn't.
He builds a very specific historical timeline to explain exactly how we got here. He traces the history of this fracture directly back to California's 1969 no-fault divorce law.
Okay, so to understand why Reicher views this as a cataclysmic shift, we have to look at what divorce was before 1969.
Historically, a marriage was a binding legal and social contract. To dissolve it, you actually had to prove fault.
Things like adultery, severe abuse, abandonment, you couldn't just walk away.
Right. But Reicher argues that the California law, which, by the way, was actually signed by Ronald Reagan.
Which is a crazy historical footnote.
It really is. But Reicher says this wasn't just a legal tweak. It was a seismic structural shift that turned marriage into a disposable contract. Suddenly, one spouse could dissolve a family without any proof of wrongdoing.
They just had to cite irreconcilable differences.
Exactly. And Reicher's argument is that this allowed for a scenario where men could lose their children, their homes, and half their retirement simply because a spouse woke up, as he puts it, bored.
I mean, let me jump in here and play as devil's advocate, or at least ask the question I think a lot of people reading this section would immediately ask.
Go for it.
Is Reicher claiming that the 1969 no-fault divorce law was designed specifically as a weapon against men? Or is he saying that the marginalization of fathers was like an unintended byproduct of a law that was really just meant to free people from genuinely toxic marriages? Because those are two very different arguments.
That's a crucial distinction to make based on the text. Reicher argues that while it may have been sold to the public as a way to escape toxic, abusive marriages without enduring a messy public trial.
Which makes sense on paper.
Right, but he says the functional application of the law quickly became weaponized. He points to the data here. Between 1970 and 1980, divorce rates spiked by 50%.
Wow, 50% in a decade.
Yes. And Riker asserts this wasn't because men suddenly became dramatically worse husbands over a 10-year period. He says it's because the unilateral power to end marriages was established with zero legal or financial consequences for the person initiating the split.
Which he knows is statistically women in about 70 to 80% of cases today.
Exactly.
And he builds on that timeline throughout the 70s and 90s, looking at legislation that was supposedly designed for equality, but which he claims fundamentally altered the power dynamics of the family.
Like the 1975 Equal Credit Opportunity Act.
Right. On the surface, if you read a standard history textbook, this is the law that allowed single women to get credit cards or mortgages without needing a male cosigner.
Sounds like basic financial equality.
It does. But how does Riker interpret the long-term effects of that specific act?
Riker views the 1975 Act through the lens of structural leverage. His argument is that by removing the necessity of the male guarantor, the state effectively stepped in to underwrite female financial independence.
Okay, so replacing the husband with the government, essentially.
In his view, yes. He says this created a structural shift where women could secure housing and build financial independence while simultaneously locking fathers out financially and legally during a divorce.
And he pairs this with his critique of the 1993 Family and Medical Leave Act, the FMLA.
Right. The FMLA gave workers up to 12 weeks of unpaid, job-protected leave for family or medical reasons.
Correct. But Riker claims that in practical corporate reality, the FMLA created a state-sponsored maternal privilege.
How so?
Because while mothers are culturally expected and encouraged by HR departments to take that time, fathers who attempt to take full FMLA leave often face severe corporate stigma.
Loss of promotion tracks, subtle penalization.
Exactly. Riker argues this essentially cemented the mother as the default primary caregiver in the eyes of the state and the corporate world. It further marginalized the father's role right there in the early developmental years.
Which brings us to the actual battlefield where all these laws collide.
The modern family court system.
Riker paints an incredibly bleak picture here. He presents a system that he believes fundamentally assumes women are the primary caregivers by default.
And he uses U.S. Census data to back this up, showing that 80% of child custody goes to mothers post-divorce.
80%.
Yeah. Riker argues this 80% figure isn't a reflection of natural preference. It's not a reflection of who is actually the better parent. He says it's a systemic bias baked into the very foundation of family law.
Essentially reducing fathers to mere financial units, ATMs that occasionally get weekend visitation.
ATMs, exactly. And this is where the text moves from historical legal analysis to deeply personal and often harrowing case studies. Riker uses specific anecdotes to illustrate how these laws play out in real life.
The story of James W. in Ohio is probably the most intense example in the book.
Yeah, that one was rough. According to Riker, James lost access to his son based on a completely false domestic violence claim.
And the text emphasizes heavily that there was zero physical evidence.
None.
Yeah.
There was no police report filed at the time. There were no witnesses, no medical records of injuries.
It was literally just a checkbox marked on a preliminary divorce filing form.
Just a checkbox. And because of the way the system is structured, James was immediately slapped with a restraining order. Now, years later, he's forced to watch his kid waze at the school bus from a gas station across town just to get a glimpse of him.
Riker doesn't call this being an absent father. He calls it being exiled.
Exiled. The concept of exile is central to his argument here, and it raises an important question about the legal mechanisms at play, specifically regarding how evidence is treated in family court versus criminal court.
Because Riker leans heavily on data to show James isn't an anomaly. He cites 2021 admissions and data from the ACLU and the American Bar Association.
And what do they acknowledge?
They acknowledge that high rates of false abuse allegations exist specifically within the context of heated custody battles.
Right.
The statistic Riker zeroes in on is that men are 3.4 times more likely to be falsely accused of abuse during a divorce than at any other time.
3.4 times. He calls this tactic parental alienation by accusation. And he traces the legality of this tactic directly to the 1994 Violence Against Women Act, or VAOA.
Yes. Riker's critique of VAOA is that it introduced mechanisms allowing for ex parte restraining orders.
Let's define that for the listener.
In legal terms, ex parte means a judge can grant a temporary restraining order based solely on the claims of one party, without the other party even being present in the courtroom to defend themselves.
So you don't even get to tell your side of the story before you're kicked out.
Exactly. While designed for emergency protection, Riker argues this mechanism has been ruthlessly weaponized in divorce proceedings. If a spouse wants sole custody and leverage over the house, filing an ex parte order instantly removes the father from the home and cuts off contact with the children.
Riker argues this flips the fundamental bedrock of the justice system. It makes men guilty until proven bankrupt by legal fees.
I mean, think about the gravity of that for a second. We're talking about a system where, according to Riker's data, the mere accusation acts as a conviction in family court.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, navigating the world today? Riker connects this directly to what you've likely observed in the modern marriage landscape.
He argues that for a man today, entering into a modern marriage contract is essentially signing up for a liability suit waiting to happen.
A liability suit waiting to happen. You work, you provide, you build a life. And under the current legal framework, you could be discarded like an expired contract, losing access to your own children in the process.
And according to the text, this immense legal and financial peril is the exact reason why 40% of men aged 25 to 35 are opting out of marriage entirely.
40%. And the cultural narrative is always that these men are failing society or suffering from Peter Pan syndrome.
Right, that they just don't want to grow up.
But Riker completely flips that script. He says they aren't failing society, they are surviving it. They are making a rational risk assessment based on the laws as they are written.
Which naturally transitions us into the next critical area Riker explores, because if the legal system has effectively exiled the father from the home, creating a vacuum of male authority.
What is happening to the boys who are left behind?
Exactly. Riker argues we are seeing the systematic medicalization of boyhood, where natural male energy is being treated not as a characteristic to be guided, but as a disease to be cured.
He points to a nationwide epidemic of what he calls the discipline deficit. And here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at how he tackles ADHD.
The prevailing medical narrative is that ADHD is a neurological condition that we are simply getting better at diagnosing.
But Riker rejects that entirely. He frames ADHD as a pharmaceutical pacifier.
He lays out a really compelling timeline here. ADHD diagnoses in boys jumped 43% between 2003 and 2011.
43% in less than a decade. And he doesn't just throw that number out in a vacuum. He directly correlates this massive spike with specific policy changes in the American education system.
Namely, the shrinking of recess time and the rise of high-stakes standardized testing under policies like No Child Left Behind.
To understand Riker's point, we really have to look at how No Child Left Behind fundamentally altered the day-to-day reality of the classroom.
The act tied federal school funding directly to standardized test scores.
Right. Riker argues this turned schools into compliance factories. Suddenly, teachers didn't have the luxury of letting kids burn off energy. They had to prep them for tests.
The environment became entirely sedentary. Rather than adapting the school environment to suit the energetic, kinetic nature of young boys, Riker argues the system decided to medicalize the child.
And he pulls back the curtain on how these diagnoses actually happen. I think a lot of people assume an ADHD diagnosis involves, brain scans or intensive psychological testing.
But Riker cites a massive 2022 Johns Hopkins review of over 400 pediatric ADHD cases.
And what did they find? 60% of those cases involved absolutely zero neurological testing.
No brain scans, no blood tests, no comprehensive psychological workups.
None of it. The Johns Hopkins review highlighted that the majority of these diagnoses were made during standard 15-minute pediatric visits.
15 minutes to diagnose a lifelong neurological condition.
Right. The primary diagnostic tool wasn't a medical test, it was behavioral checklists. Forms filled out by exhausted parents and stressed teachers who simply needed the child to sit still.
Riker is scathing in his assessment here. He argues this isn't healthcare, it is bureaucratic triage. It's a system designed to manage classroom logistics, not to optimize child development.
And to prove his point, he contrasts the American system heavily with Finland. In the Finnish education system, recess is practically a sacred right.
Kids get roughly 90 more minutes of unstructured outdoor playtime daily compared to American students.
They take a 15-minute outdoor break for every 45 minutes of instruction.
And the results speak for themselves. Their ADHD rates are a staggering 10 times lower than in the US.
10 times lower. And despite spending less time sitting at desks, their test scores in math and science consistently rank higher globally.
Riker's point is crystal clear. Letting boys be boys, letting them move, breathe, and test their physical limits actually solves the supposed disorder.
In America, we lock our boys in hard plastic chairs for 7 hours a day, remove their physical outlets, and then drug them when they inevitably squirm.
And Riker doesn't stop with ADHD. He extends this critique into even more controversial territory with what he calls the autism industrial complex.
He offers a highly critical look at the financial incentives driving modern special education. Specifically, he points to federal IDEA funds.
Let's pause for a second because he drops that acronym in the book. What exactly are IDEA funds and how do they work in this context?
Well, IDEA stands for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's a federal law that requires schools to provide special education services.
And it comes with massive federal block grants. Riker notes this funding pool is around $17 billion a year.
$17 billion. Under IDEA, school districts receive additional federal funding for every student who is diagnosed and placed on an IEP or individualized education program.
Riker's controversial claim is that school districts are financially incentivized to push school psychologists and therapists to lower diagnostic thresholds just to capture those federal grants.
He argues this leads to the massive overdiagnosis of boys who are not genuinely on the autism spectrum, but who are actually just under-disciplined, lacking boundaries, and suffering from severe screen addiction.
To back up this claim, the text provides a fascinating epidemiological counterexample: the Amish community.
Riker points to a prominent 2016 epidemiology study that looked at autism rates among the Amish.
And the researchers found near zero autism rates in these communities.
Near zero. And Riker argues this isn't due to genetic isolation or some biological anomaly. He attributes it entirely to their physical and social environment.
The Amish environment, as Riker details, involves strict, consistent discipline, a heavy reliance on physical chores from a very young age, and absolutely zero screen time.
Right. In an Amish household, you don't hand a dysregulated 5-year-old a glowing tablet to pacify him. You hand him a broom or a bucket, give him a physical task.
Riker uses the study to forcefully assert that many modern neurodivergent diagnoses in mainstream society are actually pathologizing the symptoms of poor discipline and a maternal detachment.
Basically masking basic behavioral issues as complex neurodiversity. Building on that medicalization argument, Riker delves into a really dark chapter of the book, what he terms chemical warfare via SSRIs.
He details how modern schools have integrated psychological screening into the basic curriculum. He specifically calls out the use of forms like the PHQ-9.
For context, the PHQ-9 is the Patient Health Questionnaire, a standard 9-question screening tool for depression.
It asks things like how often a person feels down, depressed, or hopeless, or if they have little interest or pleasure in doing things.
Right, but Riker's issue is how these forms are applied to young boys. A 12-year-old boy who is bored out of his mind in a sedentary classroom, who doesn't smile enough, or who isn't emotionally expressive in the very specific verbal way the school system demands.
He might fill out that form and instantly get flagged for low affect.
Exactly. From there, he is put on a track that often ends with a prescription for SSRIs, like sertraline.
Riker argues that the application of these drugs to developing male brains causes what he calls zombie compliance.
Zombie compliance.
SSRIs are designed to flatten out emotional extremes. But Riker argues that in doing so, they also blunt the natural aggression, the drive for risk-taking, and the inherent dominance behaviors that are biologically essential for male development and future leadership.
He cites pharmacological research suggesting that while these drugs make boys significantly easier to manage in a crowded classroom, they severely compromise the very traits necessary to lead, compete, or defend their families later in life.
It's a deeply unsettling picture of the modern classroom.
It really is. And it leads perfectly into Riker's next major theme. Because it's not just the curriculum or the medicine that's changing, it's the actual physical environment.
Right, Riker calls this the great indoor confinement, and he pairs it with his critique of the woke mind virus in schools.
The physical world has literally been sterilized for boys through this obsessive culture of safetyism.
Riker presents some truly startling evidence regarding the death of rough play and outdoor autonomy. He points to sociological data showing that free, unstructured outdoor play has plummeted by an astonishing 96% since 1985.
96%. The text argues that we have created a society that now fears scraped knees more than broken minds.
He shares these specific, almost absurd anecdotes to highlight the madness of modern zoning and safety bureaucracies.
I mean, think about the absurdity of this one. A father in Portland, Oregon spent the weekend building a tree fort for his son in his own backyard, out of 2x4s and plywood.
A classic dad activity.
Exactly. But the city sent an inspector, fined the father $1,200, and forced him to tear it down, labeling a standard childhood tree fort a public hazard.
Or the fact that 61% of U.S. cities have municipal ordinances on the books that allow health inspectors to shut down a kid's lemonade stand for lacking commercial health and safety permits.
It's insane. And within the schools themselves, tag and dodgeball games that have been staples of childhood for a century are now outright banned in 44% of elementary schools.
When we look at the psychological implications of these bans, Riker emphasizes the severe biological and developmental costs.
He cites a wealth of developmental psychology and neuroscience studies showing that rough and tumble play isn't just kids blowing off steam. It is biologically vital.
Wrestling, play fighting, and testing physical limits are how the mammalian brain actually builds executive function, learns emotional regulation, and develops resilience.
Exactly. Boys who wrestle learn how to take a hit without losing their temper. They learn where the line is between play and actual violence. They develop superior conflict de-escalation skills.
Riker contrasts the heavily sterilized American approach with countries like Japan and Germany.
In Japan, kindergarten fire drills often involve kids actively climbing ropes and jumping out of second-story windows into nets.
And in Germany, local youth welfare offices actually encourage risky physical play, building playgrounds with high climbing structures and uneven terrain.
In those countries, physical risk isn't eliminated. It is guided and encouraged. And the sociological result, according to Riker's data, is significantly better social cohesion, lower anxiety, and higher mental toughness among boys.
But instead of that, here we get what Riker terms the feminization of education. Schools have become these sterile compliance factories.
He tells a story that made national news. A first grader in Florida who was actually handcuffed by a school resource officer.
For what? He didn't bring a weapon to school?
No, he drew a picture of a gun with a crayon, handcuffed for a drawing.
And there's another case of a 12-year-old in Oregon who was suspended because he built a Lego spaceship. And the teacher noticed the spaceship had little gray blocks acting as laser cannons.
Which violated the school's zero-tolerance policy against objects simulating violence.
Riker uses these examples to argue that this zero-tolerance safety culture isn't actually about physical safety at all. It's about ideological indoctrination.
He claims what many refer to as the woke mind virus is actively replacing actual education and physical development.
He points to systemic changes in physical education, where games like Red Rover, which inherently promote physical competition, strength, and team strategy,
are being replaced by blindfolded trust walks that are designed to build dependency and emotional vulnerability.
And then he gets into the curriculum itself, critiquing the rise of toxic masculinity workshops and strict gender-neutral language mandates that are being pushed down into middle and even elementary schools.
Riker argues these programs actively punish boys for basic, biologically hardwired competitive instincts. They are forced to apologize for their natural male energy.
The goal of the modern educational apparatus, according to Riker, is not to raise independent, capable men, but to raise compliant, docile subjects who look to authority figures for permission to act.
So, if the schoolyard is no longer an outlet for this energy,
Yeah.
and if the legal system has marginalized fathers out of the home, where is all this restless, unguided male energy going?
Riker argues it's being absorbed by a glowing rectangle.
This leads us into the digital realm, or what Riker calls the screen nannies. We are looking at a total algorithmic hijack.
This is a crucial pivot in the book. Riker makes a chilling claim that the complex algorithms governing platforms like YouTube Kids and TikTok have quite literally replaced fathers as the primary male mentors in society.
To back this up, he dives into Stanford University research detailing how children exposed to algorithm-controlled content before the age of 8 are highly likely to develop deeply ingrained compulsive tech habits.
And Riker explains the mechanics of why it's so addictive. He talks about variable reward schedules.
For anyone unfamiliar, this is a concept derived from behavioral psychology, originally studied by B.F. Skinner using rats and pigeons.
A variable reward schedule means you don't know when the reward is coming or how big it will be.
It's the exact same psychological mechanism that powers casino slot machines. You pull the lever or swipe the screen, and maybe you get a dud, maybe you get a slight chuckle, or maybe you hit the dopamine jackpot with a viral, highly stimulating video.
Precisely. And Riker quotes former tech engineers who openly admit that these digital systems are intentionally designed to hijack the dopamine pathways, particularly in the developing male prefrontal cortex.
which is highly sensitive to visual stimuli and target acquisition. The statistics he provides to illustrate the fallout of this hijack are genuinely startling.
According to the text, the average human attention span has now dropped to just 8 seconds.
8 seconds. The average American boy between the ages of 8 and 12 spends over 6 hours a day staring at screens.
Think about that volume of time. Boys aren't out in the garage learning how to change a tire or in the woods learning how to navigate.
No, they are being mentored by Mr. Beast, absorbing viral, dangerous TikTok challenges, and being fed by algorithms that intentionally push outrage-driven, hyper-stimulating content simply to keep their eyeballs locked on the screen.
Riker bluntly states the tragedy of this reality. We have raised a YouTube generation that can effortlessly name 50 online influencers, but couldn't name 5 U.S. presidents if their lives depended on it.
And this brings us to one of the most polarizing and heavily debated sections of the text, the motherhood shift.
In our role as impartial guides, we need to unpack Riker's profound critique of what he calls frigid mothers and the broader shift toward career-centric parenting.
Riker argues that modern feminism sold an entire generation of women a fundamental lie, the promise of having it all.
The idea was that women could prioritize high-powered, demanding corporate careers while simultaneously and seamlessly managing a fulfilling family life.
But according to the book, the reality of having it all has simply led to a massive, systemic outsourcing of child rearing.
Because both parents are working 50-hour weeks to maintain a certain lifestyle, raising the children is outsourced to commercial daycares, underpaid nannies, and increasingly, iPads.
He tells a striking story of a Silicon Valley CEO mom he interviewed. She proudly showed him her nursery setup, where her 3-year-old's primary caregiver and monitor is an incredibly advanced AI-powered baby monitor.
It tracks the child's breathing, sleep cycles, and even plays algorithmic soothing sounds.
Riker uses that anecdote to illustrate a profound psychological deficit he calls mother hunger.
He claims that young boys in particular are suffering immensely from this arrangement. Biologically, they are starved of the constant physical maternal contact and the deep emotional attunement they evolved over millennia to need during their most formative years.
Riker argues this systemic detachment leads directly to boys who grow up emotionally stunted, highly anxious, and fundamentally unable to form real, secure attachments.
And the bitter irony, according to Riker, is that all of this happens while the broader culture throws parades to celebrate the mother as a corporate trailblazer.
It's a heavy critique. But Riker doesn't just stay in the psychological or digital realm. He moves into the biological environment next, introducing perhaps the most shocking claim in the entire book.
He transitions from behavioral manipulation to physical chemical manipulation. He calls it environmental sabotage and the hormone hijack.
Yes, Riker argues that the feminization of men isn't just a cultural or psychological phenomenon. It is happening at a molecular level.
He relies heavily on a major 2021 study published in the journal Environmental Science and Technology.
This study analyzed municipal tap water systems across the United States and found detectable, consistent levels of birth control estrogen.
Specifically, a synthetic hormone called ethinyl estradiol.
And the scary part Riker highlights is that our modern water treatment infrastructure simply wasn't built for this.
Standard municipal water treatment involves flocculation, settling, sand filtration, and chlorine disinfection.
That works great for killing cholera or filtering out dirt. But endocrine disruptors like ethinyl estradiol are dissolved at the molecular level.
Standard water treatment plants cannot filter them out, meaning millions of people are drinking low doses of synthetic estrogen every single day, and it is accumulating in the developing bodies of young boys.
To demonstrate the biological impact of this kind of exposure, Riker looks at ecological studies. He cites a fascinating MIT experiment involving zebrafish.
Now, researchers use zebrafish because they actually share about 70% of their genetic structure with humans, particularly regarding their endocrine systems.
In the MIT study, male zebrafish were exposed to the same low-dose estrogen levels found in municipal water. The result: the male fish lost 40% of their natural aggression and mating drive.
They became completely docile.
Riker pairs this with field data from the U.S. Geological Survey, which found that in certain heavily polluted rivers, up to 85% of male smallmouth bass were actually developing female egg cells inside their tests.
They were literally turning into hermaphrodites due to estrogenic pollutants in the water runoff.
So Riker is taking this ecological data and arguing that the exact same endocrine disruption is happening to human boys, and he connects this to the modern diet, detailing what he calls the soy boy phenomenon.
He shares a very specific medical anecdote from the text. A 14-year-old boy in Ohio who was brought to an endocrinologist because he had developed full breast tissue.
Gynecomastia.
Exactly. The doctor discovered the boy was drinking 3 liters of soy milk a day. The medical diagnosis was dietary estrogen poisoning.
Riker explains the science here. Soy contains phytoestrogens, which are plant-based compounds that mimic estrogen in the human body.
And Riker claims these phytoestrogens are up to 10,000 times more potent in binding to estrogen receptors than some synthetic environmental estrogens.
Riker takes this scientific claim and applies a socio-political lens to it. He argues that this soy-heavy, hyper-processed, plant-based diet isn't just an accidental health fad.
He claims it is actively pushed by a feminist and corporate nutrition complex specifically designed to lower population-level testosterone.
Thereby creating a generation of docile, physically weak, and compliant males who lack the biological drive to challenge authority or defend traditional structures.
He strongly challenges the reader, and by extension, you listening right now, to audit your own physical environment.
He urges fathers to invest in heavy-duty, reverse osmosis water filtration systems for their homes, because standard fridge filters won't catch endocrine disruptors.
He advocates for ditching soy and highly processed seed oils completely.
For Riker, protecting a son's biological development and future masculinity doesn't just start at the ballot box or the school board meeting. It starts right in the kitchen.
Now, if the book ended there, it would simply be a massive, depressing catalog of institutional capture.
But Riker pivots in the final sections. He transitions from a critique of the collapse into a highly specific, tactical manual for what he calls the boyhood resistance.
He focuses on reclaiming masculinity and fatherhood, not through political lobbying, but through immediate, real-world, localized solutions.
Exactly. Riker emphasizes that fathers cannot wait for the culture to fix itself. They have to take the reins back immediately. He highlights several grassroots movements that are already doing this.
First, he breaks down the mechanics of the Backyard Boys Club.
This is an informal network of fathers who decided to take their kids entirely out of the endless cycle of school psychologists and behavioral therapy loops.
Instead, they started gathering on weekends to teach their sons hard survival skills. Riker details the curriculum of these clubs.
Teaching boys how to build and maintain fires, how to purify water, and crucially, how to safely and respectfully handle .22 caliber rifles.
Riker argues that teaching a boy to use a firearm isn't about violence, it's about instilling a grave sense of responsibility, focus, and consequence.
And the result of these backyard clubs.
Right.
Riker points to massive reported drops in general anxiety among the boys and instances of kids completely coming off their prescribed ADHD medication because their need for focus and physical engagement was finally being met.
He also looks internationally for proof of concept. He spends a lot of time analyzing the B2M or Boys to Men program in Australia.
This is a brilliant initiative where at-risk youth boys who are constantly in trouble with the law or feeling out of school are taken on a rigorous 21-day digital detox deep in the Australian bush.
The parameters of the B2M program align perfectly with Riker's philosophy. There are absolutely no phones allowed, there are no model safety nets.
It is just rigorous physical survival challenges, exposure to the elements, and intense mentorship from older, disciplined men.
The data Riker provides on this program is phenomenal. He shows that participating in this bush detox dropped youth crime rates among attendees by 52%.
52%. And it significantly increased their psychological resilience scores upon returning to civilization.
Closer to home, he highlights the Iron Sons boxing program in Detroit.
This program is led by a former MMA fighter named Darius Cole. Cole's methodology is fascinating. He specifically takes in boys who have been labeled by the Detroit public school system as emotionally dysregulated, defiant, or overly aggressive.
But instead of putting them in a circle to talk about their feelings, he puts them in a boxing ring.
Right. Cole teaches them the brutal discipline of combat sports. He makes them do cold plunges to reset their nervous systems.
And most importantly, he teaches them how to take a punch to the face without losing their temper or crumbling.
Riker uses the Iron Sons program to show how disciplined, physical combat sports cure behavioral issues and deep-seated anxiety far better than any school-mandated restorative justice therapy session ever could. It channels their natural aggression into controlled competence.
And finally, he explores the Marine Military Academy in Texas. Riker views this institution as the ultimate proof of concept for his entire thesis.
The Academy operates in a model that is the exact antithesis of modern public schooling. They enforce incredibly strict discipline. They mandate early morning wake-ups.
If a cadet commits an infraction, they don't go to a restorative justice circle to discuss why they acted out. They drop and do push-ups. There is an absolute unyielding hierarchy.
And what is the outcome of this supposedly archaic, rigid system? Riker points to their 98% graduation rate.
He argues that this environment doesn't break boys, it builds them. The academy produces young men who are physically capable, emotionally stoic, and taught to lead effectively in times of crisis.
It proves Riker's central point. Boys do not crave endless coddling and safety. They fundamentally crave structure, hierarchy, and a clear path to earning respect.
Which brings us to Riker's ultimate call to arms for the reader. If we connect this to the bigger picture, he argues that the era of negotiation is over.
Fathers must stop asking for permission from the state, from the school boards, or from the broader culture to raise their sons as men.
Riker's final thesis is absolute and uncompromising. Men must aggressively audit their homes, they must enforce strict, non-negotiable screen limits,
They must demand physical competence and encourage guided risk-taking.
and most importantly, they must reestablish unquestioned hierarchy and unyielding discipline at home. He argues that historically, strong fathers are the immune system of civilization, and it is their biological and moral duty to raise defenders, not dependents.
What an incredibly dense, provocative journey through this text. To summarize everything we've covered today, Screen Raised argues that the weakness, anxiety, and lack of direction we see in young men today isn't some tragic biological accident.
According to Riker, it is the direct, measurable result of a society functioning exactly as designed by modern ideological, feminist, and Marxist institutions.
From family courts legally erasing dads, to public schools pathologizing natural boyish energy, to algorithms and environmental chemicals literally hijacking their neurological and physical development, Riker has laid out a comprehensive, terrifying map of the modern battlefield.
But his core message is empowering. It is entirely up to fathers to take the reins back and rebuild traditional masculinity from the ground up.
If what we've discussed today resonated with you, if you see these patterns in your own life or community, you really need to read the full text. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy Screen Raised. It is a vital manual for navigating this landscape.
And make sure you follow at Conrad Riker at Substack to keep up with his ongoing research.
And please remember to like and subscribe to this deep dive so we can continue bringing you these massive, in-depth breakdowns.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a lingering question. It's a thought that builds on Riker's text but pushes us to think even further into the future. Riker argues that when we suppress natural male dominance, aggression, and risk-taking, that energy doesn't just evaporate, it goes underground. It ferments into deep societal resentment, or it numbs itself through digital and pharmaceutical addiction. So ask yourself, if the institutions of society successfully legislate, medicate, and educate every last ounce of traditional physical masculinity out of the next generation, who exactly is going to be left to keep the lights on, maintain the infrastructure, and step up to fight when the real crises hit?